In a previous video, I created these accent papers using a 3-layer process. First comes an accent color, like that, and then a black layer, and then finally a lighter opaque layer. At the time, I was working in a darker, more dramatic palette, and these papers fit in perfectly. But lately, I've shifted to a softer, lighter color palette, more like this piece. These original accent papers feel a little bit too bold and high contrast for my current projects. So today, I'm going to create a new set of accent papers with a softer feel and less contrast. This time over the accent color, I'll try a variety of light to mid-tone colors in both transparent and opaque paints. It's all about adjusting the contrast, and I'll experiment with different combinations to create a range of possibilities. Let's dive in and see what we can make. So for this project, I'm going to be using 2 types of paper. This is simply a mixed media paper. It's 9 by 12. It's acid-free. It's a little bit thicker. And then I'm also going to be doing some of the stuff on the sketch paper from this company. 9 by 12. It's a rice paper, decent quality, and it's not as thick as the other. I think it might be quite interesting for these accent papers. So I'm primarily going to be using Golden Open for this first layer, and that's a purely selfish reason, and that is I can do up a bunch of these sort of one after the other. I don't have to really worry about cleaning my plate off, and at the end my plate's going to be really easy to clean. But you could totally, for this, you could use any kind of paint because we're just peeling it off in one layer. To get started, I just put out a little bit of this. How much just depends on how much color I want poking through. And I'm going to be printing up the background layer. So the background layer will become the accent color later on, poking through the other layers. So it's the first layer that's going to go on the paper. And rather than doing a build-up on the plate itself of different layers, I'm doing the layers just directly onto paper. Each layer goes onto a piece of paper, and I layer on the paper. And it's just an alternative way of doing it. Now, I actually didn't need to roll up that entire piece. I really just need to roll up part of this plate to get a background layer on. So let's see how that color is. Oh yeah, that'll be a nice little pop of color coming through. Now the next one, there's already some transparent red iron oxide on the plate, so I'm going to add a little bit of the Indian yellow and let those mix a bit. And I'll start to forget about this side now. I don't really need all that paint over there. And whether you really roll it out carefully or whether you just sort of roll it out blobby, you know, that's really a personal preference. Remember that a lot of this is going to get covered up by our later layers. So we just want that pop of an accent color coming through. Oh yeah, it's beautiful. I'm going to do a little purple this time. Purple's pretty strong. You don't need a ton of it. And I'm rolling it over top of the transparent red iron oxide. There's still a little bit of that left on the plate, and that's going to mellow it a little bit. I like an accent color, but the color palette that I'm working with these days is quite muted, both in contrast and in saturation. So I'm just going to let these two mingle on the plate. too worried about registration or anything with these because I'm only going to be using pieces of them anyway for collage in collages. Oh, that's very nice. That's quite a pretty color. Now the Indian yellow is a beautiful bright color. And green gold is just yum, but can be a little bit overwhelming. I'm just going to put a little bit of sap green out here too. Just little tiny blobs. Oh, that's nice. I find if I use the greens on their own, they can get a little bit of acidic, especially that green gold. It's a very vibrant color. But if I mix in a little bit of Indian yellow and the other greens, sort of mellows it out. I'm going to try a little bit of manganese blue on here. Whoops, that's a big dab of manganese blue. But I've already got a lot of yellow on here, so that will. Look at that. Looks like balloons or something on there. So this will give me quite a different color. I don't tend to get into this spectrum of the blue, but let's see how it works. After all, these are accent papers. And experimentation is the lifeblood of creativity. So that's just a little bit of ultramarine blue and mixed with a dab of the manganese. I use a fair bit of ultramarine blue in my work at the moment, so that may help ease the transition for this manganese blue to enter my work. Oh, there we go. More interesting than an ultramarine by itself. There's even some interesting violet tones in there. I don't know where those came from. Good. So now I have a variety of accent papers. I'll have to let those dry. And once they're dry, I'll be back to work on the next layer. So here are the papers from step 1. So I've got a nice variety of shades of bright and less bright colors to use. So what I want to do now is put on a second coat. And the holes in the second coat are going to show this nice bright color up. So in the accent papers that I've created before, I've used a fair bit of black. So I have my background accent color, the one that we've already printed. And then for my next layer, I would use something very dark, maybe carbon black with some colors in it. It just sort of depends. But I quite like that graphic nature of the black. However, with the current palette, the black is too much. It's quite a bit darker than anything else in the work. So I want to soften that up. So my goal this time is to take my accent paper and to print over either a light tone on it or a mid-tone on it. I'll do some both ways to see how that works out. Now, I want just a bit of this accent color to show through in the final papers. So I'm going to be using something a bit opaque to work with on this next layer. And I'm going to be using some fine material like grasses, twigs, strings and threads, and quite possibly some removal of paint as well, so that when I paint, what I've removed will become the accent color. We'll talk about that as we go through. So I'm going to be using some titanium white, as well as possibly Titan buff, and a few other opaque colors like that. And in some cases, I'm going to mix the paint to be sort of more of a mid-tone. This one is a fairly strong color, so I'm going to go with something fairly light. And for the most part, I'm just going to be able to put the paint directly on the palette. Although, if I want to do a more thorough mixture, I've got a sheet beside me I can do that on. Most of the paint that I'll be using for this is going to be a golden open because of its slow drying character and the fact that I can just re-roll and get another print. But some of it will be regulars. It'll be either, you know, the fluids, or I also have some of the Amsterdams that I use for this. This is quite a warm paper that I've got, so I don't want to go too cold. So if I use just titanium white, it's quite a cold white. So that's why I've just warmed it up a bit with some of the Titan Buff. Okay, and I'm going to use, in this case, some of my little grassy bits, which probably have more paint on them now than grass. And I'm also going to use a bit of twig to give it some more spaces. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting down this vegetation as masks. So basically, wherever the vegetation is, it will stop this paint from transferring to this paper, and it will leave this color showing in those spaces. When you put it down, you have to be careful not to let it move, because if it moves, it'll blur. It won't give you as clean a print. So I kind of hold it with one hand and rub it with the other. And if you've got anything like the twigs, you have to kind of get right in there with your fingers and get into the crevices. And that little growly noise that you hear in the background is my little studio dog, Katie, helping me out with my project today. And she's rolling around on the carpet and having a good scratch. There we go. This is on the rice paper. I have some on each. There. So there you go. That gives you a pretty clear idea of what this process is all about. Where I had the vegetation, I've now kept the original beautiful background color. And now I've got a softer, sort of mid-light color that makes those stand out. Ready for the third step. So I'm not going to, you know, this is gorgeous, but I'm going to just carry on here for the sake of carrying on, get some more white on there. And I'm going to use, for this next one, some of the corn silk yellow. Well, it's a lovely color. It's from our local art store, Opus. Haven't really seen it in any other brand. But again, lovely warm color. I want a fair bit of paint on the plate because I do want to have it give me fairly good coverage. But if I get too much on there, it's going to just go kind of squishy. Okay. Now for this next one, I think I'm going to do some removing. So this would, anywhere where I remove the paint, I can do it in lines or anything else that I want. And you do have to remove, you know, a fair bit of it. You don't want to And other ways of removing it would be with a fan brush. This is going to allow what is already on my piece of paper to show through. And I'm digging in firmly enough to get, you know, I can see what's underneath this now, which is a good thing. And I'm just thinking that this may be an interesting type of thing as an accent color. You know, a lot of the times you just make these things, and it's fun to make. Let's face it, there's nothing unfun about this. And then you see what it looks like, and you see if it fits in down the road to a piece of your art. Kind of in a plaid phase at the moment. So I'm just going to do a few lines across as well. All right. Now I've got a fairly dark background here because this is not as cleanly taken off as if I was using a mask. So now anywhere I can see the plate coming through, I should get a pretty good color of this. And the opaque white and fluid paint will make a pattern on there. So this is another way of doing it besides just using stencils and masks. The idea of removing the paint and then making the print. So let's see what happens with this. Oh yeah, so now I used to have a fairly dark piece of paper, and now I've got that color poking through where I've wiped it off, and I've got that creamy color all over the rest. Now I'm going to be getting into a series of purplish papers, so I'm going to want, I think, a little bit of a warmer color. So in this case, I'm thinking I might go for more of a mid-tone as opposed to a real super light tone. I'm going to put in my little twig there, and I'm going to combine that with a little bit of thread string stuff. Which can provide some really interesting shapes and lines as well. There we go. And this is sort of going to be a two-tone one here with a slightly darker accent color, and then something similar for the next level. So this is going to be more muted because there won't be as much contrast. This one's on the mixed media paper, so it's a bit stiffer. I have to be careful not to let it slide around, so I'm holding it down firmly with one hand while I rub with the other. There we go. So a two-tone print, but without anywhere near as much contrast as this one in its first two tones. There's another tone that's going to be going on top in step 3. So for the next one, I'm going to mix a little bit of titanium white with a bit of Payne's gray. So getting back to a very neutral color, but I want to make it kind of, I don't want to make it too dark, but I'd like, not as dark as a black, but I'd like to make it darker than what I'm about to print it on. Oh, that looks pretty good. This is where if I want a smooth mixture, I would mix it on a palette beside my plate and then just transfer over a few dabs when I'm ready. Now, Payne's Gray is not as opaque as the white, say, but it is not, it'll be fine with the white in it. I think I'll still get decent coverage. So this is not a terribly bright first coat, but it's quite rich. It's got a nice rich color with the dioxazine purple and the transparent red iron oxide. So again, the twig and the string are going to save this color for me, and the rest will become this background color. And we'll just see how that color works. You know, I love to do this printing, so none of it is ever a waste. And often I'll print something that's, yeah, it doesn't turn out to be kind of the color palette that I'm into in a particular point in time. But then it might be the color palette I'm dealing with 3 months from now, so who knows? I put it in my stash. Make sure I know where it is so I can get at it. And see what happens. I might need a strip or a circle or a rectangle of this down the road for one of my work. Oh yeah, whoops, I guess that's the end of that. Well, that came out quite well. So I've got a very good coverage of the background areas, and that makes this nice muted color stand out really well. Now, I've got kind of a beautiful thing going on here, and I have a very faint background that I just pulled at some point, and I'm thinking that might be quite interesting to go on there. So I'm going to just put that down and capture it. Never waste anything. If you've got an interesting image on your plate, even though it's not what you're looking for at that time, just grab a piece of paper and print it. Oh yeah, look at that. That is very interesting. So I'm not going to put a third layer over this. I'm going to leave this as it is because I think that's pretty special the way it is. So we're 2/3 of the way there. At this point, I've got a nice stack of papers in a variety of colors and value. I'd like to go through these and separate them into categories before I proceed. So the top category here are a couple of prints I just really like the way they are. There's kind of an interesting texture in the background and motif, and I'm going to leave these prints just like this without adding any additional layers. The next stack is quite light. I've started with the accent color, and then I've gone ahead and printed over top of it with various light colors. Some of them are lighter than others, but they're all pretty much light to mid-light colors. So these ones, I'm thinking of doing a transparent, darker mid-tone over top of. And fortunately, because I really don't know how that's going to work out, I have some ones that I'm really not that attached to. They're sort of sacrificial prints. So I'm going to be able to get started by trying out some of these ideas on here, on these papers that I'm not that attached to, and see how it goes. That'll inform my next steps. And the final stack is more of a mid-tone. So these ones I'm actually quite attached to, although I'm going to have to start somewhere with them. But these ones are more of a mid-tone, so I don't really want to go any darker with them. So I'm thinking that what I'll need to do is add a mid-light over top of them. And fortunately, again, I had a couple that I was less attached to. So I'll be able to try out the technique that I'm thinking of on these and find out, you know, what's the right amount of paint, and what some of the mixtures might be that I'll want to use. So I've got lots of printing to get going on here. Now a mask is just anything that prevents the ink from going onto the paper. So in this case, if I use some botanical masks that I've made from my prints and from photographs, that will give me an interesting third layer. So how much you want of this layer to come through in the final print, that's going to inform you about how big your little mask needs to be. So if you just want a little bit of it, you want it to mostly go to the new color, then use a fine mask. And if you want something where you get more of the existing colors left, then you'd want to use something with more spaces covered up. So big shapes or small shapes, it's all up to your mask. Now you can use any type of stencil or mask that fits in with your work. If you're interested in seeing how I actually created these stencils using one of my prints and using Photoshop and then my Cricut cutter, I'll put a card in the corner to take you to the right video. So I'm going to start with the lighter prints, and I'm going to add a transparent layer over top to give me my final pattern. And one thing you have to think about when you're doing this is anything that you add over top is going to darken the print. So if I start off with a print like this, for example, it's never going to be this light again. Whatever I do over top will make it darker. So I'd like to use transparent pigments where possible, and probably not a lot. I'm thinking that I don't want to make this layer too dark. And if I use a lot of paint, it will get quite a bit darker. On the other hand, that's one of the unknowns. I'm going to have to experiment to find out what's the best amount of paint to put on at this stage. And I might just throw on a little bit of some thread too, just to give it a different little bit of texture. Oops. There we go. So this is what it looks like now. There we are. So that's quite interesting. The blue actually came up a bit more vibrant than I was expecting. I thought I'd get a certain amount of dulling back, but I think that's got some quite interesting texture in it, and some of the accent color, and then some of the lighter color as well. So this one is a green one. So this is green with a little bit of a cream color over top. I think the blue will look fairly good on this. Oh yeah, this is quite interesting. So this initial ripple pattern I made with this toilet paper roll. It was very messy rolling it in there, but it basically pushed through the creamy color into the green and allowed the green to show through a little bit. And I could definitely see myself using some of those chunks. Now for some of these lighter ones that have got a bit more of a yellow or orange tone in them, I think I'm going to use some transparent red iron oxide for these as a counterpoint. Again, I'm not rolling out a thick layer. I'm rolling out a pretty thin layer. And this one is one I don't really care for, but it'll give me an idea of how this color is going to look on top of this type of a print. And hey, it can't hurt the print, can it? Because I don't like it, so anything it does to it, either I'll still not like it, or it may work out, who knows. Oh, that's interesting. So that did not darken it anywhere near as much as I thought it was going to. It's now made the accent color the darkest, and it has, I've still got the pattern coming from the stencil, this leafy thing in the background, so it's quite interesting. Certainly didn't make it too dark. Oh, well, that's quite interesting. I quite like this broken texture in the back here that it got, and you can definitely see the original stencil of twigs that I had on there, but also a fairly clear image of that lacy branches and leaves that I've got over top. I like the color combination. Oh, it's a little bit better. You can see more of an equalization between the two layers. And this one, I'm going to print the ghost of this on this background. I think it might just be a nice balance. Oh yeah, getting a little sticky there. Well, that is quite interesting, with these swirly things going on in the background and the lines through it. So I'm moving on now to the ones that are already sort of a mid-tone. So for these ones, I'm thinking that I'm going to need to put on something in a light or mid-light. So in order to lighten a print, you're going to have to add a light opaque, which, you know, let's face it, that primarily means white plus something. So in this particular case, I'm going to use a combination of white with some dioxazine purple and a little bit of transparent red iron oxide. And for this, I'm going to do a loose mixture over here and then put it on the plate and roll it out. So it's not going to be really super thoroughly blended, but I'm going to be able to better control the value of it. And I want to put enough on here that I'm actually going to get some decent coverage. The whole point is to lighten it. Now again, what I choose to use as a stencil will influence how much of this pattern that I get. So larger masks areas, more of this pattern. And this is one of the ones I'm not that fond of. So, you know, if this doesn't come out particularly well, it's not that big a deal. This is the rice paper. I quite like it because I get this tactile feel of what I'm pressing through it. It's a little bit easier to press around stencils and botanicals in particular than, say, the mixed media paper. The mixed media paper is pretty stiff. Okay. Oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, Yeah. So I've got the accent color, then I have the mid dark that went on next, and now with this light gray, it's brought back some of the value. It hasn't gone too dark. Now, when you don't get what you want, you get experience. And I can tell right now, just from rolling this, that I have a bit too much paint on here. It's going to go kind of squishy. So I'm just going to take some and roll it out on the back of a brayer, on the back of a sheet, and just take a little bit of this off. I can kind of feel it when it's too thick. This is something you learn to develop. You got to make some mistakes in order to find out what works. Okay, I'm going to use this stencil again. I am enjoying the threads. I don't know if this is something that you'd like or not, but I just find it gives an extra design element of line in there. Okay, so this one has got not a lot of contrast between the first layer and the second layer, so we'll see what this does with it. Well, the image has gotten quite complex, but I think that for some of the things that I'm looking for, that might work out just fine. So this is kind of a jumbly print, so I'm hoping that this next layer will kind of pull it together a little bit, but certainly enough to be able to use some of the pieces. Well, it's quite submerged the original image, but I think it's got some pretty interesting patches in it that will be useful. Oh, that's quite an interesting one. I really wasn't thinking of doing blues over top of that bright orangey yellow, but that actually worked out really well. So let's take a look at the results. I've managed to create quite a nice variety of papers. And I've selected out a few to show you in more detail. So first thing I'm looking at is value and contrast. And there's definitely sections of these different papers which will go quite well if I continue on this same sort of theme of color, which is I'm quite enjoying at the moment. Now, it all depends on color scheme. This somewhat muddled paper, I think, is actually going to have some interesting possibilities if I'm using a bit more ultramarine blue in my piece. This one truly fits the definition of an accent paper. It brings out some of those rich colors that I've incorporated in my work, and I can cut out strips or rectangles or circles or tear a piece or whatever else I want to incorporate into it. And the key thing that makes this paper successful is it has a bright accent color and then a very soft muted background in the third layer. Again, depending on color scheme, this also could be a contender. So let's see how we find the gold in those pieces. Let's take this one, for example. This is a very confused piece of paper. The third layer really quite submerged the original layers underneath it. But I quite like some of this motley accidental stuff. To me, some of the accidental things are more interesting than some of the things that are on purpose. So let's just take a wee bit of a peek. So you can just plop these L's down just about anywhere that you like, and I'm going to find something quite interesting in here. Whether it would be a circle or a rectangle or perhaps something more irregular that was torn out of here. I think there's some really, really beautiful bits in here. This one I could even see taking larger chunks out of. There might be some little pieces that are suitable, but I think I also could take a bit of a motif, something that already has a composition within it, and use that as a focal point in a particular work. And interestingly enough, this was one of my sacrificial prints. The original print I didn't care for very much at all. And when I put the third layer on, which is this sort of grayish color, it just seemed to make it so much more interesting. This one, again, is one that I did. The second layer was scratched into the plate with a fan brush and with other tools. So it only allowed a small amount of the original color to come through. But then when I printed the ghost of one of the roll-ups on there, so instead of just discarding it, I said, oh, that's too nice, let's print it on this goofy background. Well, now I've got some just beautiful pieces with the rhythm of the fan brush and the little marks, and then the leaves superimposed on top with the stencil. So this has been a surprising piece of paper. This one is very muted, and again, that could be very, very good for a piece of background. So something where I just wanted something in a particular area of the mixed media work, but I didn't want it to stand out. I just want it to be a supporting cast member. Then a piece of this could be very, very interesting. You just don't kind of know what you've got until you look with the L's. And then this piece I absolutely love. There are just some absolutely beautiful bits in here. I did a little bit of cardboard stamping into the original first layer, so it has a little bit of a variegated tone. And then, there really wasn't too much of a second layer. It was too much the same color, so it didn't really show. And then the third layer in this variegated gray color just pulls it all together. And it is one of my favorite stencils as well. I really do enjoy a lot of these shapes. So again, hunting around for pieces of this that will be useful. But this one would make a very nice color accent without taking over the entire piece, which is the problem that I was having with these, because the contrast was so stark between the black and the other colors. It was just overwhelming them, whereas something like this is beautiful but subtle. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see the video where I make these ones, I will leave a link on the end screen and in the description for you. See you soon.